This chapter explores rare but significant forms of criminal homicide, including mass and serial murder. Cases where one individual kills multiple victims over time. Serial murder is covered in greater depth in Professor Reese's Serial Killers course, CRJ 235. From the outset, it's important to recognize that while some preventive measures exist, accurately predicting who will commit multiple murders remains highly uncertain. Nevertheless, efforts must be made. This section introduces investigative psychology and profiling techniques. Investigative psychology applies psychological research and principles to criminal investigations, aiming to answer three key questions. What behavioral characteristics of a crime can aid in identifying and prosecuting the perpetrator? What inferences can be drawn about the offender's characteristics to assist in identification? Could other crimes be linked to the same offender? Chair, please. Criminal profiling is a scientific investigative technique that analyzes evidence to develop a psychological profile of a suspect. Specifically, it involves identifying an offender's personality traits, behavioral patterns, and demographic characteristics based on crime scene details. The ultimate goal is to assist in identifying the perpetrator. Profiling can be categorized into 5 overlapping types. 1. Psychological profiling. 2. Suspect-based profiling. 3. Geographical profiling. 4. Crime scene profiling. 5. Equivocal death analysis. While each type is explored in this chapter, equivocal death analysis is the least relevant to multiple murder cases. See Table 10.1 for a summary of profiling method. Each approach, and the investigators who employ them, utilizes distinct techniques to analyze a suspect, crime scene, or incident. For instance, Table 10.3 outlines characteristics commonly associated with school shooters. Some profiling methods rely on either a clinical or actuarial approach. The clinical approach is case-focused, aiming to infer an offender's characteristics from evidence in a specific crime or series of crimes. It emphasizes understanding, describing, and identifying a single offender based on case details. This method relies heavily on experience and training and is often influenced by intuition, subjectivity, and gut feelings. The actuarial approach, in contrast, uses statistical data from past offenders to identify patterns and characteristics that may apply to a current suspect who has committed similar crimes. Let's talk psychological profiling. Psychological profiling is an assessment tool used to identify and predict behavior in known individuals. While often associated with criminal investigations, it is not limited to negative traits. It can also be used to evaluate positive characteristics, such as those relevant to law enforcement or political candidates. For our purposes, however, we focus on profiling negative traits linked to criminal behavior. Psychological profiling consists of 2 key approaches. 1. Threat assessment, covered in Chapter 8. This approach evaluates the credibility and seriousness of threat posed by an individual or group. Threat assessment is used when a specific threat has already been made against a person, facility, institution, or organization. For example, it may apply to a high school student who threatens to take out the school, or an employee who makes alarming comments about co-workers or supervisors. 2. Risk assessment. This approach involves evaluating the likelihood of an individual engaging in harmful behavior, often based on psychological, behavioral, and historical factors. Your text goes into detail regarding suspect-based profiling, geographical profiling, crime scene profiling, and equivocal death analysis. Crime scene profiling is also called offender profiling, criminal profiling, crime scene analysis, and criminal investigative analysis. Crime scene profiling is the process of identifying personality traits, behavioral patterns, geographic habits, cognitive tendencies, and demographic features of an unknown offender based on characteristics of the crime. In 1984, the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, located in the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, was created, and within it the Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU, and the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP. Today, most of the crime scene profiling is conducted under the auspices of the BAU. This section covers key terms and concepts that students of criminal investigations should understand. One such concept is signature, also known as personation, which refers to any behavior beyond what is necessary to commit the crime. For instance, a serial offender may exhibit a repetitive, ritualistic pattern across multiple crimes, demonstrating a distinct behavior that is unrelated to the act itself. Staging occurs when a crime scene is deliberately altered before law enforcement arrives, often by someone other than the perpetrator. This is typically done for one of two reasons: either to mislead investigators and divert suspicion from the most logical suspect, or to protect the victim or their family. Staging is often carried out by someone with a personal connection to the victim. Autoeroticism involves self-arousal and sexual gratification without a partner. In some cases, the method of autoerotic activity, such as self-strangulation or hanging, can result in accidental death. These scenes may initially resemble homicides or suicides, but are, in fact, unintentional fatalities. Finally, an offender may engage in undoing, a psychological response in which they attempt to symbolically undo the murder through specific behaviors at the crime scene. Crime scenes and offenders are often classified as organized, disorganized, or mixed, a distinction first introduced by early FBI profilers. An organized crime scene suggests planning and premeditation by the offender. It indicates that the perpetrator maintained control over both themselves and the victim, particularly in crimes against persons. In contrast, a disorganized crime scene reflects a lack of planning, suggesting the crime was committed impulsively, in a fit of rage, or under extreme emotional distress. A mixed crime scene displays characteristics of both organized and disorganized behaviors, indicating that the offender's actions may have been influenced by changing circumstances or conflicting psychological states. There is much more information in this section. For example, confirmation bias and equivocal death analysis are covered. Once again, Professor Reese encourages you to read this section carefully. There's a lot of good information there.